Because I remember that there's an interview with the guys from Diantward with Ninja, and he talks about Cara Delevingne, and he's just like, yeah, that girl's on, like, there's stuff that we wouldn't do. She was like, let's do it.
Oh yeah,
she's like she's a full libertine, right? Like that's that's how they describe her.
A libertine. Have you ever seen Diantward?
No, not like live.
Yeah,
or Diantward yet. No, I've not seen them live, but I definitely like.
That's
I love.
show.
I think that Ninja gave one of the best explanations for.
Don't look at me.
Oh, don't look at you. Ninja gave one of the best explanations for developing a personality. Big part of like Downward was like this isn't real thing, right? And then there's I'd watch lots of interviews where they're totally in character and everyone kind of allows them to do it. And then someone asks them like asks them a question directly, like, is it real, this personality? And he fucking nails it, because he nails not just his own, what he's doing, but what everyone else is doing. And it's like, he's like, well, what's more honest? The person that you are because of your circumstances, or the person that you are that you decide to be?
Oh man, Ninja.
And I was like, man, that he nailed every hip hop personality.
You're making me fall in love all over again.
It's like I thought that was the clearest answer for the hip hop persona. You know, it's like Dr. Dre.
Absolutely.
Like Dr. Dre was a rapper and DJ at roller rinks in California. You know, the West Coast hip hop scene was essentially, you know, that life was totally different. It was pre-gang, really, in that when it first when hip hop really hit in New York. Mm-hmm. So they were kind of searching for their own authenticity, and they had to kind of generate it. But it's like those guys were sort of doing they had to do their own thing, and they ended up coming with gangster rap and like, you know, the gangs and all that shit. But it's funny when you hear their early stuff, it's like totally like, it's like Will Smith kind of thing, you know. That's where those guys were at. I mean, they were just having fun. But they find that, you know, they find that point of contact, that where just people just are attracted.
Right. I think it kind of evolves. It's more of like the self-made person, the natural born hustler.
Well, for sure. But one thing I think an interesting thing to think about is, like, say with I think the classic, there's the two personalities, Notorious B.I.G. and Tupac Shakur, both come from single mothers. And what they're embodying is an expression of a masculinity that they feel that they've had to create. They didn't learn it; they saw it and then designed it out of what they wanted themselves to be. That when they were not powerless, right? Who was a powerful person? Well, no parent taught them that. They learned it from pop culture, from identifying with people around them,
from the violence in their community.
Yeah. Well, one thing too, though, was like Tupac was a fucking. He went to private school.
Yeah.
Like he was a ballerina.
He's a poet.
He was a poet, but this is why he was the only guy talking about shit like Machiavelli. But it's because he went to like private school. I mean, he had a different education. He wasn't exposed to this kind of shit. He moved to Oakland specifically to learn about it and then reflected. But that's why his lyricism was so high. It's because his education was so good.
Yeah.
He didn't have to go that route. He decided to do it because that's the thing that excited him and maybe fulfilled something that might have been his relationship with masculinity and father figures.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and what a man's supposed to be.
Yeah, Tupac and Biggie. Well, like what we were talking about before, off camera, with good and evil. It made me think a lot about like diatonicism, like the diatonic scale, you know. Okay. And I feel like Tupac and Biggie are kind of like is the diatonicism of the hip hop community, with that super intellectual, self-aware persona in Tupac, and then the really gritty but also smooth and charismatic aspect of Biggie.
Yeah, I mean, I can see
and
that.
I feel like there's always some sort of, like, if you're going to make two spectral points in hip-hop today, I feel like there's somewhere, well, maybe you might have to add a y-axis with Migos and shit.
I think that, like, for Tupac, there's this presence of expressing the, like, what was like, I mean, a California version of things, right? With California is its own part of America that seems to be just has this, you know, like New York up until like a certain point in like what the fucking late 80s, maybe early 90s, was just a vile, fucking crazy. Like, it looked like a war zone.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of those guys in the 70s, 80s grew up in neighborhoods that were just like arsons.
Oh, shit.
Like, there was an arson scene where like old landlords were just burning down old buildings and collecting insurance, and it was like the city was constantly burning. You know, so I think that becomes this hotbed. I feel like California can responds to hip hop coming from a place of, I wouldn't call it privilege, but kind of like privilege. Like it's a different. No one's
freezing to death.
No one's freezing. There's a certain joy, so they can kind of pick and choose. You know, hip hop almost like it was like necessary in New York. California, it was like it wasn't as necessary.
They approached it from a point of like, not from a point of necessity, but from a point of interest. They're just
totally. It was the preeminent cultural expression in the African American community.
That's right. And also New York already has people from California don't really have an accent, you know, compared to people from New York. New York kind of already had like a linguistic style. Yeah. Compared to California.
Well, because anytime I see interviews with those guys, it was always very much about focused on boroughs.
From New York?
Yeah. Boroughs were like the thing, right? Like, say, like...
right, yeah. You don't really hear a lot of borough rap from California. You hear Compton, and then you don't
Well, because they see themselves as like almost like multiple cities. You know, it seemed like I guess I was watching this thing on Wu-Tang and they talked about Staten Island. Like when they referred to Shaolin in the old Wu-Tang albums, they were talking about Staten Island.
No shit.
Yeah, and they were like, we don't get enough respect out in Staten, man, blah, blah, blah. It's like, it's like Shaolin, Staten, and blah, blah. And they had this whole fucking scheme that they
Staten Island sword style.
Drummed up, right? Where they like sort of crossed over all this sort of like kung fu movies and culture and ethic into sort of replacing real words of like reference that were more real, so that they could kind of have this, like they could interject these stories with this kind of fantasy as well.
Right.
So it's like it could be gritty and super like, you know, like underground, but simultaneously they're like referencing all kinds of like Bushido stuff and like, you know,
surface and analogy,
like
man.
Wing Chun, like, well, I mean, like all the movies, right? Like Master Killer,
Seven Samurai,
Shogun Assassin. I mean, Shogun Assassin's like one of the greatest.
I haven't seen it. Oh
man, that's the one where in Jizz's Liquid Swords that has that kid talking about, like, you know, he's like a voiceover from a kid's voice, and it's like how him and his dad are basically, you know, going to go kill the Shogun. It's great. It's one of the greatest scenes ever, where it's like the Shogun kills the mother, and so the kid, the father has to go avenge the mother, and so he has a baby, and he gives the baby two choices. He's like, you pick the ball, then you must die because I must go. Or you pick the sword, and then we dedicate our lives to revenging your mother. And so the kid goes and he touches the sword, and he's like, he picks the baby, and it's like, your mother would be proud. You know, it's like, and so he's like, they're like, at one point, like they're hanging the kid over the well, and they're like, we're gonna kill your son. He's like, he knows what we've decided. You know, like so the kid as a child like decided that he was gonna be a part of this revenge trip. Anyway.
Bushido shit, dude.
Yeah.
I had a video game for PS2 or PS1, Bushido Blade. Fantastic.
One of the best games for PS1 ever, because that's the one
you
that
played
started,
it? You know it?
Yeah, it started so many fights.
You're the first person I've met, man.
Started some legit fights where it's like you get the Naginata, and then it's like, go. It's like, boom, just like hit him right in the face, kill him. Like, no, that's not it. No, like get like full on fights breaking out.
No,
like,
you can't do that.
Like, it's like, dude, you should protect your face.
But that's not Bushido. You're not being Bushido.
Wow.
If you fucking go straight for the face. Well, that was my argument.
Someone's bleeding out in the snow in the bamboo forest, and someone's standing there with his body. You know? That's about where it comes down to. Right?
I liked, this is my favorite. I like to start like this, you know, in this one.
Yeah, the high stance.
Because there was this stance. Nick, you would lose your mind over this video. This is like the first this is the first 3D fighting game I played, like 1v1 fighting game. And it was PS1. It was like pretty early.
I think it's one of the most like it's probably the best samurai simulator.
Yeah,
because it's one hit kill. Like if you time it right,
one hit kill.
Boom. Like it's like it can start and you're like go low. It's like and then it's like if they step forward and you go up, it's like you're done. You're done. It's a liver hit right there. You're done. You know?
And there's six different weapons or 5 different weapons or something like that.
I don't know. There's like you know, long sword, short sword,
rapier, pike. There's all this stuff, and there's 3 different stances. It's a music podcast, by the way. 3 different stances, and then if you hit the person one time, in the midsection, they would die. But if you hit them in the leg, then they'd be down on one knee.
Yeah, it was,
and you'd have to defend yourself on one knee.
We'd skip school and we'd go to my buddy's place.
Oh, I missed a lot.
And then we'd sit there all afternoon, like until his mom came home. We'd all get out of there. Throw on Wu-Tang, throw on 36 Chambers, play Bushido Blade. You know.
Who's your favorite? Okay, who is your favorite Wu-Tang?
Well, I mean, I didn't listen to much, but I'd say the RZA's great moments are like probably the best in my mind. Mm-hmm. But then Ghostface is just, I mean, he's proven himself over years to be.
Now you see me, now you don't. You know what I'm saying? Ghostface. Cool, man. Well, I wanted to ask you if you knew about, because you got me thinking with this the guy you were working with, who will be unnamed. Unless you want to name him, who has all these instruments, with percussion instruments. Have you ever heard of Evelyn Glennie?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
I watched this documentary with Evelyn Glennie, and she's got something like 8,000 percussion instruments. Mm-hmm. And she's like, half of these I haven't even played. Yeah. And it becomes like this addiction to just sound. And I don't like, a percussion instrument. Like there's probably more percussion instruments than any other instruments because they're just a sound. They're not like a collection of sounds that you can play with it. Just one type of sound. And I kind of lost my point, but
well, I mean, I think having like these huge collections. So I was speaking about a composer that I worked with recently, doing in a studio where they had like they had probably thousands of instruments. I think it's like an ethic, And I think that one of the neat things was like working with him. It was cool when we would start a new project because he'd always want something different. Huh?
I remember my point.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll just say so like having someone that like had all these instruments, and there was always sort of defaults that were easy to go to. One of the things is that we would be like, okay, we're doing like a space western game, and it's gonna be like more exploration based, and we kind of want this sort of weird space but kind of western thing. And so it was like, he's like, what can we do? We'd sort of chat about it over coffee. Let's make some weird. Let's get a little guitar amp, and let's get the resonator guitar out. But let's set something up weird. I have this kit, and so we took a speaker and we taped it to the resonator guitar, so we could. And then we had a mixer for it, and then we would take that sound of the guitar and we'd feed it back into the resonator, so that we could create physical vibrations in the guitar. So as we're sliding into notes, we can hang those notes because we're also sending that tone back into the guitar.
Oh, sick!
So just like little stuff like that, and that would be like, let's just try a couple things out, and then that would, we'd kind of bring in default things, but every time he started something new, he'd want to do some new sound, some little weird thing that we were like,
different way to hack it.
We're just like plugging in pedals. It's like no, just anything like that, right? And that's what I thought was really cool about how his approach was to be like, let's make something new with something in the world, physical.
Yeah.
He never brought up a plug-in for things. We definitely do a lot of like reverb, delay, and texture stuff later on. Valhalla, but to the max. Yeah, it's like, okay, what's this? Fucking put some shimmer on there, man. Let's go. Okay, crank it. And so to create those textures, because then those textures would form that space that we could go and grab any kind of weird object. It would just be like, I remember the weirdest part was editing him. I'm like, fucking whatever. I'm not, I'm just an engineer, right? I've done, my stuff has been more practical based. So he would be like, he would jam on something for the whole track. And he'd be like, okay, edit that down. And then I edited like half of it out. And he's like, no, fuck. Edit more than that. And he's like, he basically only wanted like 20% of what he played left.
So he's just an explosion of creativity, and he's like, there's something in there.
There's something there. Check this, edit that down, and grab something and go in. And I come back and he's like, there wasn't enough, edit it out. So I had to like be brutal with the edits. Be like, that whole minute, gone. And he'd be like, that would be a good call. Like, you made a good call. So I was like, that was cool, man. I was like, so that was a really learning experience where it's like to just like brutally edit down people's work
and to
just use your own instinct melodically,
your
right?
Intuition.
Like, does this work or does it not? And then like when you edit something else, like you might just be like, I'm just going to use one little motif there, and it's like, oh, and so it's like, oh, wait, I got something, and then that would, because then you're not relying on a specific like. The arrangement or say that you're not relying on the orchestration to make decisions. You're listening to it melodically, and like you cut all that out. And it's like, oh wait a minute, I'm gonna get the hong drum out or some fucking crazy thing like that, right? Like, oh let's grab a guitar, or
that's another layer.
Let's set up the drum kit. Let's get the drum kit out. You know, like weird stuff, like just anything. Right? I thought that was really cool.
When you're listening to it, it adds another layer of like being able to hear it again, and then come back to it and modify the sound. It makes it a little more improvisational, where you can react to what you've already had down.
It's very living. Yeah, it was neat. Like, I mean, we got into this thing where we were
less rigid.
We were like, we were taking harmonica stuff. He's like, this is a harmonica I got when I was a kid. This is like one of the things I'd carry in my pocket when I was a little kid. And I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. And then we'd take this harmonica and we play it, but then we pitch it down 4 octaves because we were like running at pretty high resolution. We'd pitch it down 4 octaves and then we just super verbed it out. And so we had like whale music out of this thing. And that would be like, it's like all those weird whale music sounds, like a whale's like in the distance. That's Buddy's childhood harmonica.
Oh, that's so cool, man.
So every day was like that, It was always kind of like chasing those kinds of things.
But my point from before was, do you think the age of instrument collector is coming to an end? Because I feel like the desire to want to, scrape together all of these different sounds, these tangible sounds. This hung drum makes a certain sound, this cowbell makes a certain sound, this gamelan instrument makes a certain sound. I need them in order to make the sounds, is all being put onto the new guitar of our generation.
The laptop.
So, do you think we'll lose anything in not having to build our instruments anymore?
I think that it'll always oscillate. I mean, I think
you think it'll go back?
I think it always oscillates back and forth. And I think it needs to have that as a healthy way to do things. Like, look at the DX7. The Yamaha DX7 came out and people were just throwing gear out. Like I had a synth instructor where he bought an ARP 2500, which is just like a fucking like end of the road holy grail synth. And it's like he bought that for like a couple $100 because the university was just like they bought the hype and we're just like, why do we need this big, huge, unruly synth? We got DX7s now. Forget it. We're changing the program over, Mm-hmm. It's like when Flash was the end of the road. Like a lot of instructors that like from now, we'll talk about when they were sort of coming up through academia in interactivity and computational arts was sort of where I'm at right now. They talk about how important Flash was. It was significant, and now it's gone. It's dead. It's because it just didn't adapt well to the mobile environment.
Right.
And they were like, you know what, this is just too unruly. It works well in HTML and, on the internet, on the desktop, but it doesn't work on mobile. Fuck it, it's gone. And then it's gone. Next to this thing that was the preeminent mode of creating interaction is gone. So I think like with sounds, we'll go back and forth for sure. You know what I mean? I feel like, because the thing is, then synths became too like, it's like your grandfather, Jan Hammer, and like these guys, and it's like fuck that shit, man. We're gonna bring the amps back out. Like I think.
So you think synths? You don't think synths are like you don't think synths will just get better and better and better, and people will just endlessly get better? You think they're more genred?
No, not genre. I just think that every time something gets established,
part of history.
Something gets established and becomes too present, people will like behind it will always come this kind of like new mode of expression behind it. Yeah, not subvert. I think it's just like, I think it's natural. I think it's totally natural. Like I think of like, excuse me. Hey, could we grab some more of these beers here?
Yeah, come on.
Some bring the whole case down here.
Just bring it on down.
I just think that I can just see things coming in and out, and I think that's an honest way for things to go. Like I love synths, I love what laptops are doing.
Yeah,
but like you can just sort of see that. Like I use examples of grunge, 1990s, right?
Go on.
It's like look at the 1980s music. Mm-hmm. Look at what it sounded like, what it looked like, what were the tools that were being used, what were the sounds that were being created, and then look what grunge did, like how it landed. It was like people just felt like music became so inauthentic because it became an established approach.
I see what you mean, yeah.
You got like Robert Palmer,
Duncan.
You got like Phil Collins, the CR78, you got like the metal guys, it just became such like a kind of so full of shit.
Yeah, I wonder what.
And so like when stuff becomes like so popular, it's not like this bad because I don't really have these. I don't have these opinions of negativity or positivity about any music. Really, I think it all fits.
Yeah.
Because the listener appreciates it, whatever, right? It brings them joy. That's it. Doesn't matter.
That's the only thing that matters. I'm with you.
That's the only thing that matters, right?
I'm with you.
So I think that when, I think that we see this point where we always see that something will crest and then something will subvert it because it naturally has fallen into a point of hubris. Where it thinks that I think the late 1980s just got to the point where it's like this is basically Queen and Van Halen in the most terrible, shittiest form, right? Like Van Halen landed with Van Halen 1 and it was like the bomb went off, right? Mm-hmm. And that just had this whole this whole thing that was like it was original for a moment and then it became so copied and then these sort of rules got established and then it just became uninteresting. It didn't become a cultural expression. It became a sort of cultural feedback. It was feeding back.
Became an echo chamber.
Echo chamber. Because I think I look at I'm a big metal fan, right? This is like one of my favorite forms of music. And I can only listen, I can't go back and listen to the metal that I listened to when I was younger. I can only listen to the weirdest shit. Because I feel like that's okay, that's exciting because to me, the problem that happened.
How many times have you played that metal though, personally?
Oh, I don't know.
Actually gone through all those changes, all those breakdowns.
Oh fuck!
All the stuff you grew up with.
I would just listen to one part of a song just over and over and over.
Because
again.
I feel like a lot of music, a lot of the power of music, this thing music none of us really understand, is in novelty and is in the excitement of it being new. And you not really understanding it. Because I've had a lot of relationships with songs, whereas when I was a kid and I was learning guitar, I would just print off tabs and tabs and tabs and tabs and tabs, stacks of tabs.
Like my high school library,
staple them together.
I could print it for free. We were just printing binders.
I'd have to get 5 or 6 of the same tab from different websites because one part was right on one and the part was right on the other. Tabs were shitty. Always.
Are
shitty.
you knew, but it's like this guy doesn't know what the fuck he's doing.
Exactly. But I think he got the bridge, so I'll keep it. But then I started to realize that it was harder for me to really listen to these songs anymore, or to stay on and be like, okay, because once I kind of pulled the curtain back on the song, they kind of lost a bit of its magic.
For sure.
And it scared me.
It's like unaddressed. You know what I mean? Like for me, that's like an unaddressed thing where it's like, okay, there's so much stuff that I listened to growing up where I will never decide to throw it on. Never. There's never a time in my life now where I'm going to put that song on because but it's a difference when you're a musician and you dive deep into songs so much. Mm-hmm. And that wonder that happens, that's the best feeling. And so I'm always seeking that wonder. So that's kind of where I feel like I'm really off the roadmap now.
Right. Like
I'm listening to fucking experimental black metal, because that's the place where I can find those moments of being like, whoa.
Yeah.
And because that's always what I've been chasing.
Novelty, I think.
Yeah, but the thing is though too, it is the moments of novelty. But I wouldn't call it novelty. That feeling of being of discovering something, like your brain discovering something. Mm-hmm. It's like, yeah, okay, this is this is something. Like I love that moment when you listen to Montreux Jazz Fest or something like that, and someone does a solo, and there's a moment in that solo where everyone starts clapping. That's like that Charlie Parker moment, dude. Where it's like, yeah. That's always what I'm seeking. But I just don't. My language is stuck in fucking metal, which is just so full of so much tried garbage. And I have to navigate it, but that's I think kind of I geared myself that way, so I have to kind of really go off into the backwoods to get that sensation again.
Right. It's a pursued exploration
for sure. But I guess the more you play music, I feel like the more it does lose its luster.
And I think probably,
except certain things really stick up.
It becomes almost an education in the most positive sense possible, where you want to, you kind of need this newness or this, that thing that you kind of need, you need it's kind of just like juice in your brain. It's like a drug. Music is like totally. A drug. And that was my point when you brought up Nirvana, how they came in.
Or grunge.
Because or grunge.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Nirvana.
Yeah, no, but Nirvana exactly.
Nirvana and Pearl Jam, if we're going by satellite radio standards.
Soundgarden, right? Like, yeah. But no, Nirvana definitely. Yeah, no, that's it.
But when they came in, there has to be maybe there's another level to music that we don't quite understand that has more to do with just the music, you know? Because if you were trying to put like music on a continuum, on some sort of value continuum, it'd be very hard to do that in like the last 50 years. You know, if you're just looking at say the Baroque period into the classical period into the Romantic period, you know, we kind of had confidence thinking that we were on a continuum of improvement and, you know,
that's modernism itself, right?
And then we get to this point where there's this whole other layer of, oh, these people aren't following the rules anymore. And so there's value in that, you know?
It had to happen, and it had to happen in America, right?
But how does that make the way we perceive music? Like most people, what's music? Oh, it's just sound. You know, you can appreciate it for just being sound. But if you have to understand all of the aspects, like you have to know that they're like Nirvana or Pearl Jam is not doing something that we considered good before. You kind of have to know that to add value to this new music. So going forward into the future, will people be able to recognize the value of the grunge movement or the value of gent?
Chom FM, man, that clearly that has some sort of lasting power.
Yeah, how long are we going to have classic rock stations?
Oh, well, we got grunge. You know? I mean, we got classic rock. That's got about good 30, 40 years out of that. Chom FM, grunge scene. Going to come right back to that. So
grunge has its own satellite radio station, which I'm sick of. There's two Nirvana songs and a Pearl Jam song, and then it repeats.
Like Nickelback, Theory of a Dead Man, back to back to back to back.
Yeah.
Get it in you. Are you working hard today? Then you need to hear some Pearl Jam.
Has it been a while since you've heard a Stain
song? Yeah, I mean, you know, because I grew like that's funny. When I was growing up in that time, like all my friends just went to that moment, and I was just like, but I'm like getting into this black metal shit and like, you know, listening to these weird, you know, it was like I suddenly became like persona non grata because I was just like I'd throw an album on and people just look at each other like, no, man. It's like, but that's just like listen to it. It's like, nah, man, no. So it gets tied to your sense of self, right? Mm-hmm. I don't think I have a musical sense of self in that same way, where I think of like an era as being most. I have like certainly a certain nostalgia for certain times, mm-hmm. but I'm always like looking for the next discovery when it comes to music and sound, because I think that. I mean, I was kind of like touching on it before, but I didn't get to it. But it was like, it depends on how many ingredients are in the recipe. That to me is from what I've come to learn. Like, so I listen to a lot of metal. You can tell when there was a lot of ingredients, and you can tell when there's not a lot of ingredients. It's like Hatebreed, not a lot of ingredients. Judas Priest, Black Sabbath, Iron Maiden, a lot of ingredients. You know, it's like no, Iron Maiden wasn't copying Iron Maiden. You know, so that's what made it kind of fresh and unique. And I feel like when bands are like, it's like we're a hardcore band and all we listen to is hardcore music, so we're going to write hardcore songs. It's like, right. Well, so I guess we don't really need to fucking even listen to it because we can just imagine how it's going to sound.
Exactly.
It's
more of a conception.
And so that's where I see like when you see like these early bands in the 60s and stuff, the interesting part was that there hadn't really been electrified music that often. So they were kind of pulling from a lot of different stuff. So it's like blues is getting pulled in and it's being electrified, and then it's adding this certain like, you know, a certain kind of like different types of jazz or like sort of big show music, like cabaret type shit. Like it ends up having a lot of ingredients, so it's rich when it comes out. You know, like I say Hendrix. I've been like on this Hendrix trip right now for like the last couple of weeks because I'm trying to get back into guitar, mm-hmm. and Hendrix is the mountaintop. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like it's like you don't need like that's those books, all those songs just have so much in them.
Top of the list, yeah.
But it's because it has so much ingredients. Like he's a chef that's just like fusioning everything in. You know, you're getting traditional blues, you're getting all out experimentation on fucking psychedelics. you're getting like an understanding of just like, well, let's just make something catchy.
Yeah.
Like you're getting all these levels of like deep to shallow, all put together into
Rock,
something.
jazz.
And so when you like look at those songs, they're just like, man, there's so much in them. And it's just like, and I think that's where we get really cynical when we start being in this zone where we're really copying ourselves.
Yeah.
And we're copying, we're genrering ourselves into these silos, into these corners. And I think that when something, and also we also think of like a genre in a very short time scale than we should. Right? Like we look at like what we've done in the last, we think it's like, oh, everything's changing. The old is new again. It's like, man, how long was the classical period? The Romantic period? I mean, shit was like 100 years.
Yeah.
The Renaissance period, I mean, that's like, this kind of goes back, it sort of goes back till it fades out, a couple hundred years. So we start thinking of like, oh yeah, like the 80s was the 80s. It's like, we're not out of the 80s yet.
No.
We're not done with that yet. We're not done with the 90s. We're not do that. Right now, we were still forming this thing from the instrumentation that we have. I would say laptops add like a sort of a new era, and that would be probably about mid 2000s. But that is kind of a shift, but we're still within this like electric guitars, portable recording equipment era where it wasn't just like someone decided who gets to be recorded.
That's right. Kind of a democratization of music. We're in that phase, which I think is probably still a post-war phase. It's still from 1945 on.
Yeah, I think so too.
We're kind of still in that phase, except it's to us. Maybe not to, history in general, but it seems very dramatic to us, the changes we've gone through.
For sure. That's why I think it's like within any time scale, we don't have that large perspective, but we're still in the 80s. The 80s didn't, like, it wasn't, the 80s weren't just the 80s.
Yeah, exactly. We can't really do it by decade.
Yeah, and I think that's one of these things that we always make these assumptions about,
Especially satellite radio.
Well, for sure, man. 80s on 8, 90s on 9.
Well, as a guitar player, a very talented guitar player, what do you like to play the most? Because would you say your guitar is your instrument?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, just because it sort of ended up being like that. I guess for me, I'm a practicing guitar is like, you sort of decide to do it or not. And if you continue to do it, I mean, for me, it's always just been, I mean, I just sort of improvisational, which is mainly like the lazy person's guide to like, I'm not giving up guitar, but I'm not committing myself to doing something with it. And so that's where like in the last month, I've sort of committed myself to being like, what's the mountaintop?
Yeah,
I put a post. It's like when I was quitting smoke. When someone quits smoking and they tell everybody. I put a post on Facebook and I'm like, I'm gonna ascend Mount Hendrix this year, and I don't give a fuck what's going on. I'm gonna do Little Wing, Voodoo Child. Like, I'm gonna get to Voodoo Child. I'm gonna fucking do it. Even if it sounds like garbage, like I just like going to bed when your fingers are stinging. I remember that when I was a kid too.
Oh, man.
Like as a teenager, like laying in bed and you can just feel your fingertips like stinging, and it's just like that's when you're on the you're working, you're doing it, and like so I'm getting that feeling back again and remembering those sensations because I think that it's
as a craft.
Yeah, as a craft,
not just a form of expression, but an actual something to develop.
But it's also too. It's like there's has these personal ties to like those moments.
How did you get into guitar? Why guitar?
My old man played guitar.
Oh yeah.
And so he said he couldn't afford to buy me anything for my birthday, so he just like, here, take this. And he just gave me a guitar and a little shitty amp, Sears amp.
How old?
I was like 13.
Sick. Oh, me too.
So I was like, then on my way home with my guitar and my amp, I went to the gas station and bought a Guitar World with fucking Dave Navarro with a shotgun on the front. It had Metallica 1 and Red House in the tab section, and so you just take that, and that's hard ass fucking.
Want to introduce our guest?
Oh yeah, well I mean we're gonna have it on the video type, but Travis Mercredi.
Yeah, Mercredi Wednesday.
Travis Wednesday. The big and powerful. Yeah, crazy. So you are a metal aficionado, much more than me.
Somehow that happened, yeah.
how metal, the genres of metal are somewhat incomprehensible to me.
Okay, yeah.
What's your favorite?
Oh, black metal, by far. That's my punk rock.
Why is black metal better than doom metal?
Okay, so for me, it's like I grew up in the Northwest Territories, and about the time I like maybe like 10 or some shit, 10 to 13, 14. This sort of cultural zeitgeist was gangster rap, which I can still rap
up there in the territories.
Yeah. Oh, for sure, man. Like Doggy Style showed up on cassette, and it was like that was it, man. That was it. I can still rap whole songs to those. I mean, I got to memorize. Like I'm pretty agnostic when it comes to like loyalties on music.
Yeah.
Like I know what resonates with me, but I don't like to judge music because I think it's all fucking great, you know.
It's all music.
And so I just remember, we were driving back from a camping trip a couple of years ago, me and my buddy, and then a song came, someone threw on a Snoop Dogg song, and I rapped it just like for kicks, just like I rapped the whole thing. They're like, my buddies was like, I had no idea. I was like, man, that came out and was like, boom, it landed huge, you know? But when I found, the big thing is like being from a very remote place, a very northern place, being an indigenous person, you like nothing. When you listen to the reality that's expressed in music, what do you find that resonates with you? And is it sincere to who you are? I found it not. You know, I just found like everything that came out was not. And black metal, oddly enough, for all the things that don't relate to me, one of the big things was place. And it really situated itself in the north, in the winter, in the dark. Like, fuck everyone else. We're fucking here. We don't need none of those people. We're like, and it was just empowering to be an individual that was in that harsh climate. And that just, to me, was just like made perfect sense. And I just found the music really interesting. And it's a lot of those people that were part of that scene have grown and just evolved. And I've been able to follow their careers, and they've just completely changed. You know, they're like, they do more like ambient music or electronic stuff. Like, so there's a couple big figures in that scene originally that have gone from just, screaming their heads off, to double bass to doing very, very impressive new works that I think is great. And so
that's interesting to me, because when you think of genres, the genre of black metal is very different than like the genre of romantic music, Because
I think those are
they're very similar on the point of say musical
I think they exist in the same egg.
But what I mean is, romantic music was 100 years, Yeah. And most people in the romantic era did not consider themselves romantic musicians. Same with most musicians, or most notable musicians in the Impressionist era, did not consider themselves impressionist. It was put onto them. It was a cataloged era, almost a cataloged genre.
But there's
hindsight. But with, say, like black metal, I mean, if you're a black metal band, do you have to kind of decide to be a black metal band?
No, basically what it was kind of like because actually it's funny that you bring up romantics. They're basically the romantic, like how the romantics subverted classical music is essentially what black metal is in the metal scene for sure.
Oh,
so like this sort of passion, this like putting emotion into music or putting an ambience or a mood into music. Like classical was very much about the organization of sonorities, right?
Right.
And how those and this sort of like, I always use this one reference, Bach. Yeah, it's like music has two purposes: the glory of God, and refreshment of the soul.
Ooh,
right. And so there was something in that arrangement of sonorities that created this experience that was comforting. It fulfilled something, and I think the romantics just wanted to, I think they wanted to put themselves in the music.
It became almost idol worship in a way. With romantic music,
I feel like they wanted, because when I listen,
first time you get celebrity in music.
Yeah, but I feel like for me, it's like when I listen to like Raleigh Porter or like Ben Frost, Clark, these kind of like new sort of like experimental techno ambient kind of musicians, they're right with like Scriabin. who is like, to me, Scriabin is like, that is like, Scriabin and the Romantics, like Scriabin and early Schoenberg, right? Those guys to me are like that feeling of just like melting into the fucking ether, you know?
Yeah.
Like you just there's something there, and I think that those guys, like, they were just like frustrated little fucking edgelords in Norway in a really super Christian society, and wanted to have a sensation of something just bigger than themselves, and you know, they sort of tried to manifest it. And you know, there's so much trite, stupid shit in black metal. Like there's so much like bad politics. I mean, that's the hard part, being like,
well, that's the thing about a genre that I find so, like, I was asking a friend of mine, like, when do you think we'll be done with genres? Do you think we'll ever be done with genres? And I wanted to ask, what was so interesting to me, what you said about black metal, was that all of these black metal artists that you love are very experimental, and they're doing ambient stuff now. They're doing all this other stuff.
A good portion. Enough of them for me to like be like, great.
So I find that very like inspiring, because it always, especially as a kid, before I knew a lot, when I would hear like Debussy hated that he was called an impressionist musician, I was like, oh man, like, but I love impressionism, and you can see such a common thread. But when you say like a musician is talented enough and he wants to express himself in a certain way, he becomes a black metal musician, and he's like, oh, now I'm going to express myself in a different way, and he almost has a catalog of genres to choose from.
Yeah, for sure.
In the human experience, I think that's super interesting.
Well, because the band I would refer to is Ulver, Ulver. It's a Norwegian band. They kind of like introduced a certain approach of like singing and doing almost more like shoegaze elements in their stuff early on. That became kind of like de rigueur, and then they sort of just like, they did their like harshest, weirdest, craziest album, and then boom, just went totally electronic. No, right next, it was just like, people were like, what? You guys were like, because they were like major, a huge influence in the scene. Like people were watching them. They were one of the major bands. And then when they did that, I think a lot of people didn't know how to respond to that. But it was great because they had charted this path for themselves, and they still improve, and their albums are still. They still find something interesting. As a music listener, I still like their last album. I like played it out on Bandcamp every day, where they're just like, "Hey, you can't listen to this anymore until you pay us." Like, not yet. I'm just not. I don't have the money, you know. But so I think that was really. I think that is cool that the genre could birth that kind of thing, because I feel like the big thing. A big thing with genre is just how much people are committed to it. You know?
And I think that births more genres in kind of the meta genre of metal. I don't know. I have a certain perception of people that are into metal. Some may call them metalheads.
Oh, I have perceptions myself too.
That they are a little bit more committed than the average, let's say, indie rocker. You know, someone who's into just indie rock in general. Because, like, when you're a metalhead, you have to know the difference between 35 different genres of metal. I guess that, you know, there's EDMs like that.
Well, it's funny.
Sense.
It's a fanaticism, right? And there's like, I found this interesting.
Commitment.
Well, there's like, you'll notice that if you go to a record store that still opens today, you'll see that some of the biggest selections in those places are metal and country. And for somehow, like, I don't hate country. I love a lot of country, and I hate a lot of country.
You never got down with Dwight Yoakam? Come on.
Well, you know, you get it. Like, there's actually this really great scene. There's like Gems on VHS. If you get a chance, check that out. It's like this sort of like underground, like small indie country scene that's happening in the States, and it's fucking awesome. They're doing like the old school shit, like the sort of Merle Haggard level, where it's like deadly songwriting, storytelling, and like having this like really carrying the tradition forward. You know, it's not Shania Twain. You know what I mean? Like that's like the motley crew of
stadium country. I call it.
Yeah, it's
pandering
just
country.
Stuff. But but I find it funny that there's like these fanatical audiences, and you know, I was reading a book on sort of how we move forward in music and how we keep up with, you know, with different things, and it's like, yeah, the last people standing are metalheads and fucking country fans.
Yeah,
and those people will keep buying CDs That's just they just can't get out of it.
Yeah.
And I find that hilarious because I'm like, I can see that. Those guys are just like, oh, you know, like you like get the CD. It's like, this is it, you know.
I wonder what the connecting thread is between country and metal.
Working class people that are like, you know,
masculine expression, perhaps.
I don't know if it's masculine. I think it's just
not to say that there aren't a number of.
I think they're not looking for the next thing. I think that they're looking for the thing, and they know what there's a certain understanding.
Trying to get closer and closer to what country,
but not necessarily closer and closer, but they have a sense of understanding what the purity of the genre is, and that's what they're seeking,
right?
You know, like I know that's kind of what differentiates me from the average metalhead is that I'm always sort of like trying to like almost move out of it because it's like I'm not gonna throw a song back. I remember like, oh man, throwing like the new shit on and people being like, no, take that off. Throw some Anthrax on. Yeah, that's good. Okay. You know, just like I remember throwing on like, and I was like, man, I just throw on like the shit just came out. You're throwing shit from 15 fucking years ago, like 20 years ago, like, you know, but it was just, you know, there's a sense of purity about the genre. And I think country and metal definitely have the audience that sees it that way. Pop is whatever is happening right now. Yeah. You know, indie rock is whatever's fashion. There's a big part of fashionability to that. And you know, politics. I love the genre. I mean, I've played that in that genre a lot. You know, and it's like there's some stuff that seems to like really have legs, but there's some stuff that just goes out the fucking window right away.
I think indie rock's a bit more dynamic. It doesn't really. There's not as much of a through line.
Because I think it really is about fashionability. Man.
It's because I think it's more. Yeah, I think it's more
because it's really politics, about what's on that right before the pop mainstream, and what's right after the general public, right? Like there's like I don't know how to describe it. Indie rock exists in this in between, right? Like it's still pop music, but it's not pop music. Like the Pixies, right. The Pixies are a great example. They've been around forever. Arcade Fire.
I give Arcade Fire that. They're like the least independent indie rock band.
But man, they just totally bagged ABBA on that last single. I was like, this
Everything Now?
It's like 85% ABBA. And
I didn't listen to that album much.
I don't know, man.
I heard it
like
once.
Whatever that main single was, I heard it and I was just like, are you guys trying anymore?
Oh yeah, they had that. Like, it was the backing vocals.
Like you guys had some.
Like you have everything now. Everything now.
I was like, this is not this, and it was like if you listen to that chord progression, everything, it's like it's so close. I forget what the track is. It's an ABBA track that it's like it's almost like indistinguishable. Like if you just removed vocals and maybe like change the arrangement a little bit. I don't know.
Yeah.
I was just like,
I guess the primary songwriter is Win, right? Win, that's his name, Win Butler or something.
I can't speak to them on that.
I think he does. I think he kind of does like he has like a Paul Simon-esque way of making albums where he'll pick like that Reflector album was a super Haitian album. Like it had a lot of Haitian rhythms and things like that. And then I think this one was a little bit more in the vein of fucking disco and ABBA and shit.
I can see that. Yeah, okay, that makes sense, yeah.
And then the further back you go, it gets a little bit more like Aqualungy and like really weird obscure indie rock, some Bright Eye stuff.
Holy fuck, Bright Eyes! I haven't heard that. No, that's a name I've not heard in a long time. Hey, that's
Bright Eyes.
Yeah. Days of Parasitos or whatever. Like I had a drummer that was just like it was that in Mars Volta. He'd just come home.
Bright Eyes and Mars Volta. Was that a joyful individual? I doubt it.
No, and Days of Parasitos as well. No, he'd come home and just light up the drum kit every day at like 5 in the evening. Just like absolutely fucking destroy it. What's up, man? Hey, yeah, good. Go to the basement. Just like full on like the Mars Volta, like exposed id on the kit. You know, your arms go numb and you're just fucking hitting everything.
Who is the drummer for Mars Volta?
Oh, I forget his name, but
Jared Leto do that too?
I mean, like that I would say that was like Delos in the Comatorium and Francis the Mute. I think those those albums to me were like, when those came out, like to be able to be that close to pop culture and put something out that intensely like relentlessly musical.
Yeah.
It's crazy. It's like anytime we throw that on and people were into it. It was a weird thing. I mean, because that's like Yes's Relayer album, right?
Hey, yeah.
It just where it's just all out, like Gates of Delirium, just like fuck, let's go, man. Riff, shred, break. Like we're gonna have 40 parts in the song, and it's just gonna go balls out. Every weird idea we have, we're gonna just embody it and just give her. And I feel like that was really interesting with Mars Volta. I mean, it hasn't really spread past because I think it was just too much. I think people didn't know how. So? Well, I just think that those guys hit a certain point. They were kind of like they like moved out of a genre and they became an individual thing. So a scene wasn't following them.
Yeah. I see. They had no genre to fall back on, really.
Like, well, we kind of, because I remember I was like, this is like if Santana was in Yes, and they were just fucking killing it, you know?
Yeah,
just like mainline a couple fucking hits of heroin. And
Santana and John McLaughlin were both in Yes,
and they were like, let's go, hit the red button and let's shred.
Okay, guys, we're probably never gonna do an album after this.
yeah.
Just wanted to let you know.
It's like I'm about to have a heart attack.
This is the last one.
Let's cut it.